Cartoons tend to repeat themselves a lot. Story types are easy to replicate, but hard to refresh. And when you have an order to make dozens of different stories to tell through animation in the span of a year, across multiple years, there's going to be some patterns in the messages and subtext, even in the best of shows. So I thought it'd be fun to compare two episodes in a similar style and vein to one another, and see which is more effective. This is directly inspired by The Recast, a podcast made by Pie Guy Rules and Monsters Review that did the same thing, and I think there's still some untapped comparisons across animation history. So join me in this new review series I like to call The Showdown. Why not start with a bang by talking about SpongeBob and two of its most compatible pre-movie episodes, The Paper from Season 1 and Idiot Box from Season 3. Both are about SpongeBob using his imagination to make ordinary objects more interesting, and Squidward wanting to use them over time without understanding what makes them work. Both are great episodes, but which is greater? We should start by looking at The Paper first. The story is as follows. Squidward is relaxing in his front lawn, but is too lazy to throw his gum wrapper anywhere other than SpongeBob's front lawn. SpongeBob at first really wants to give this piece of rubbish back to Squidward, who constantly refuses. So he does as many fun activities with the paper as he possibly can, which inevitably piques Squidward's interest. Like a lot of Season 1 episodes, it's slim in terms of subject matter and exploration. Only the street and certain parts of Squidward's house are ever explored. But what the paper makes up for in bare necessities is its jokes. This is one of the funniest episodes of Season 1, because the piece of paper SpongeBob has is the writers and animators' canvas for hundreds of possible laughs, and the ones they went with were great. Maybe a little old hat, but great. As the episode goes on, Squidward gets more interested in the paper and its possibilities, but tries to deny it at first, showing his own skills at his own hobbies, all of which are well outdone by SpongeBob. He eventually caves in and trades everything he has for it, confusing SpongeBob at first since he still remembers Squidward telling him to never return the paper to him, but settling for his shirt.
Squidward's shirt. I've always loved that shirt. Okay, I'll trade.
In the end, Squidward discovers the hard way that it wasn't the paper doing all those things, it was SpongeBob and his SpongeBobiness. So he's lost everything over a trade that wasn't worth it, and which Patrick takes and throws away. I can understand people not liking this ending, finding it too bleak of a note to end on, but the way I see it, bringing the tone back down to earth to show how Squidward just doesn't understand the paper or the imagination SpongeBob had to use it, was a smart move that brought things full circle. You could argue that there's a less positive message in here, that people like Squidward don't have the capacity to have fun like SpongeBob does, which other episodes can disprove. But I tend to look at the bigger picture. But speaking of bigger pictures, watching some scenes today on a high-definition screen, yikes. It's not the worst animation of the season, but this moment of green screening here is pretty bad these days. This is a pivotal point in the plot too, which doesn't help in selling the action. The thing that impresses me the most about this episode though, is SpongeBob's characterization. While not his quintessential character spotlight, the paper makes great use of his strong suits, namely the childlike optimism. It results in one of my favorite jokes in all of SpongeBob.
Hooray! Hooray! That was great, Squidward. All those wrong notes you play made it sound more original.
And probably his most emotional line delivery ever.
Oh, Squidward, is this still part of the test? Because it's really getting harder and harder to keep my promise.
But putting aside traits, I'd say his actions are also great, but have a legitimate purpose here. Just how creative he is to repurpose this piece of gum wrapper is an exaggerated but earnest way to show how useful keeping and reusing old things can be. That's probably the episode's biggest issue though, that they sometimes forget it's a gum wrapper and mistake it for a white sheet of drawing paper. I think everyone can take a different lesson away from this episode, it's that tightly plotted. I won't make this some pretentious video essay, but I will say this. If you haven't watched SpongeBob in a while and want to remember why it was so great, this is one of the first episodes you should revisit. With that, on to Idiot Box. Although this one was made 2 seasons later, when the show had cleaner animation and a more developed sense of humour, it still follows that similar, albeit primitive, setup. SpongeBob and Patrick have ordered a big screen TV just to play in the box, ironically ignoring that means of instant entertainment in favour of making up their own adventures. Remember, this was still before flat-screen TVs became dominant, so TV boxes were still able to be played in. Squidward scoffs at their plan and takes the TV for himself, but can't help but be invested in their stories. Immediately, I noticed the humor was a little darker here than in the paper, with the mountain climbing fantasy taking a very violent turn, and the power of the box not really enticing Squidward, but teasing him like he's a dog. It turns out there's no real action going on inside the box, it's just SpongeBob and Patrick making noises. Beep beep beep.
Arr. Boop, 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 boop. Ahoy, matey.
But Squidward still wants to see why he's hearing such vivid fantasies. In a sharp contrast to the paper, Idiot Box implies Squidward not only has a bigger imagination than SpongeBob, but an overactive one, which results in arguably a more sensible Squidward going nuts ending. He sneaks into the box late at night, failing to find any secret sound equipment that he expected them to be using, but then he starts imagining again. It seems he's riding a Formula 1 race boat, when it's really the garbage truck coming to take the box to the dump, at midnight for some reason. Compared to the paper, it's a slightly bigger, more outrageous ending. And with the whole story now in perspective, can I take a moment to gush about this title? For those who don't know, the Idiot Box used to be a slang term for television, and the box in the episode, as long as it contains SpongeBob and Patrick, can be considered a box for idiots. Even the title is a really good joke. One thing Idiot Box has in common with the paper is that the jokes are really good. The way it takes things like boxes and rainbows and makes them funnier over the course of the runtime is wonderful. They had more of a grasp on the general rules of comedy at this point, like when and how to repeat jokes, and a firm idea of what reality they're in. A bland one, all things considered. The fact that the stakes are so low when you remove the sound is startling. But in terms of characters, despite only having 3, it feels a little more bloated. Squidward gets about the same amount of screen time, while SpongeBob now has to bounce off Patrick, and he does that well, but it means there's less of a SpongeBob hook to this episode, especially since there are long scenes that just show the box, and we just have to hear them playing inside. It's for a joke, I get that, but it's still a visual issue that wouldn't crop up today, where every visual gag pushes the story forward. One last thing, and this is a major coincidence, but another thing both these episodes have in common is that they foreshadow later ones. That's to be expected with a nearly 500 episode show, but it's just another thing I wanted to point out. So I've laid out my opinions on both these episodes, what they did right, what one has over the other, so I find it fair to tell you that of these 2 episodes, I prefer the paper. It was a close call, since Idiot Box shares many of the paper's strong suits and message to value everyday items, but because the paper did it with a much stronger focus on character and a more structured plot, I personally found it to be a more clever and memorable episode. I think it goes to show how much SpongeBob changed in just 2 years, and how its wackier storylines complemented the wackier sense of humour better. Let me know what you think of these episodes, which one you like more, and what other shows and episodes you'd like to see sometime soon on The Showdown. Goodbye for now.